Without prejudice discussion is a discussion that an employer enters into with an employee on the basis that there is some kind of dispute between the parties. So it's a conversation that is entered into with a view to trying to reach settlement or to try and reach some agreed exit from employment before the matter could go to litigation. If it is a genuine without prejudice discussion, it means that the content of that discussion is protected and it cannot be relied on by either the employer or the employee if the matter were to go to court. So by way of example, if there is a disciplinary action that is ongoing against the employee and it looks like the outcome of that disciplinary procedure could be the termination of the employee's employment, but the employee is disputing that, the employer may call the employee to a discussion to have on a without prejudice basis to say, rather than us continuing with this procedure which could terminate your employment, would you be interested in having a discussion about agreeing the terms of your exit? The concept of protected conversations was introduced in 2013, essentially as an alternative, or not necessarily an alternative, but a different way of protecting certain conversations between employers and employees in court. The without prejudice rule, there is a requirement with a without prejudice discussion that there's an existing dispute between the parties. With a protected conversation, there doesn't need to be a dispute between the parties. So in that respect, it can be wider. There's no dispute, but you have a conversation with an employee as an employer, essentially before you are looking to terminate their employment to see if you can agree terms of their exit. However, whilst in some respects it's wider because there don't have to be the same specific facts of a dispute, you can actually only ensure that a conversation is protected if the employee brings a claim for unfair dismissal. If an employee subsequently brings a claim for unfair dismissal and another cause of action, such as, for example, discrimination, that runs the risk of not protecting the conversation that you had before the individual's dismissal. Very often employers consider conversations or discussions that they're going to have with employees, whether there is an issue in the working relationship, and very often if they are looking to potentially part ways. And very often employers consider what that discussion should be called. So you have legal concepts such as without prejudice and protected conversations, but very often people think that there are meanings in things like off the record. And if you have a discussion with somebody that is off the record, that means that it's protected, or in some ways it didn't really happen, or it's off the record. So we're having this discussion, but it doesn't fit with the reality of what's actually happening, and that's completely incorrect. There is no legal definition or legal meaning to off the record. It doesn't actually mean anything in law. So if as an employer you have an off the record discussion, if the employee is dismissed and they then bring a claim, they would be able to rely on the content of that discussion. That said, however, having a conversation with an employee that is off the record may dictate or focus the minds of both the parties into both thinking that actually there is a discussion that's being had which is different to, for example, an open discussion or something. Employers often think that there are different conversations that they can have with employees, and they tend to label conversations such as an open discussion or a formal discussion or an informal discussion. And in law, these don't actually mean anything. They are all discussions with employees, and were that employee to subsequently bring a claim against the employee would be able to rely on the content of that discussion. However, I think it's important to consider what it may mean as between the individuals. An employee may respond or approach a meeting very differently depending on whether it is labelled as a formal meeting where they may prepare more and be concerned and maybe consider whether they want to bring a companion with them, as against an informal discussion where they may think, they're just going to have a chat and nothing really turns on it. I think the idea of an open conversation as well may encourage an employee to bare their soul a bit more, or to be more honest and open about how they're feeling in their work situation.